Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, sir.
Now, I can understand this sense of outrage which has greeted recent disclosures about police surveillance. But frankly, I can't understand the sense of surprise, particularly as a black person, because those disclosures merely serve to confirm, beyond challenge, that the surveillance of dissent is an institutional pillar of our political order. It is a mode of governance. Now, the collection of intelligence, to my mind, by these methods, is best understood as a sequential process, which embraces, first of all, the selection of the subject, an organization or individual, for surveillance. Secondly, the techniques, both overt and clandestine, used in monitoring the subject or target. Thirdly, the processing and retention of the information collected. And finally, its evaluation in the light of the strategic purpose, that is, the intelligence mission. Now, that process also includes an activist or aggressive aspect, specifically designed to damage or harass the target. But whether formally classified as passive data collection or aggressive intelligence, the intelligence function is dominated by a punitive or prescriptive purpose. Even the selection of the target embodies a judgment of deviance from the dominant political culture. And race naturally plays a significant role in identifying deviance. For police discretion, as we've long known, is routinely exercised through the prism of race. Now, I said at the outset that I can't understand the sense of surprise. So let us go back for a moment to the beginning of the 20th century. In 1914, Marcus Garvey founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association. At about that time, John Edgar Hoover became head of the newly formed Federal Bureau of Investigation, and he was to remain its director from 1924 to 1977. And in his capacity as head of America's Federal Investigative Department, he was instrumental in overseeing the investigation and prosecution of suspected criminal activity in the United States for more than 5 decades. Now, the first 2 decades of the 20th century was a time of increasing popular radicalism in the United States. And Hoover quickly made his mark. He was given the responsibility of heading a new section of the Justice Department, which was established to gather evidence on radical groups. Hoover quickly became the Justice Department's expert on radicalism. As head of the new division, he was responsible for organizing the arrest and deportation of suspected communists and radicals in the United States. Marcus Garvey, unsurprisingly, soon rose to the top of Hoover's list. Federal agents, in collaboration with the New York City Police, had begun to report on Garvey's speeches as early as 1917. And the circulation of the newspaper published by the UNIA, the Negro World newspaper, ballooned in terms of circulation in 1919. This was the height of the popularity of the UNIA, 1919 to 1921. On the 11th of May, 1921, Hoover submitted a brief to the Department of State about Garvey's activities in the United States. And he referred to Garvey as, quote, unquote, a notorious Negro agitator. Hoover zealously set about to gather damaging evidence on Garvey and his growing movement. According to a historian of the time, Theodore Kornweibel, Hoover and the Justice Department were clearly hooked on a fixation on Garvey, which before long became a vendetta. Now, Hoover had relied on part-time black informants to track Garvey's movements and the UNIA activities. But in December 1919, his determination to go after Garvey led Hoover to hire the first black agent in the FBI's history. By this time, the Bureau had discovered that it wasn't going to learn all it needed to know about Garvey without someone being able to penetrate the movement. And of course, white agents simply couldn't do it. They were totally conspicuous. Now, the first black agent's name was James Wormley Jones, known as Jack Jones. He was known by the code number 800. His job was to go into Harlem and to infiltrate the Garvey movement and to try and find evidence that could be used to build a legal case for ultimately getting rid of Garvey. And over the next 5 years, largely on the Hoover's direction, the FBI would report on UNIA activities in over 24 cities across the United States. And eventually, as you know, it led to the disruption of that movement and its ultimate demise. Now, decades later, Hoover would use precisely the same methods he had developed to counter Garvey's influence against other black leaders, such as the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and the Black Panther Party. So let's jump forward half a century. As the battle lines formed around the civil rights issue and the enactment of civil rights legislation in the early Kennedy years, the FBI was faced with an intensified pressure from its southern constituency to discredit the movement by linking it with subversion. For almost a decade, racist politicians, both in the states and Congress, had fought the freedom movement with the weapon of counter-subversion. Now they look to Hoover to give his official blessing to their outcries that the communists were seeking to exploit the civil rights issue for subversive ends. The payoff for establishing a linkage between King's movement and communism could hardly have been greater. King himself was the primary target, since King had demonstrated his outstanding role in the movement. So the assistant director of the FBI at the time, William C. Sullivan, wrote, and I quote, and here the echoes from the 1920s, "We must mark him," that's King now, "if we have not done so before, as the most dangerous Negro of the future of this nation from the standpoint of communism, the Negro, and national security." Echoes of Garvey. Now the rest is history. As we know, on Thursday, the 4th of April, 1968, King was fatally shot at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. Yet that was nothing compared to the venom with which the FBI pursued the Black Panthers and similar groups. In 1967, the FBI approved the setting up of a group called the Black Nationalist Hate Groups Program. Its objective was to neutralize and disrupt groups such as the Black Student Unions, the Student Nonviolent Coordination Committee, the Southern Christian Leadership, and the United Slaves. Now, the tactics adopted involved, and again, here are echoes of our own experiences here, fomenting internal factionalism and external rivalries, incitement to violence, the instigation of pretext raids and arrests by the local police, the vandalization of publications. And the techniques included the use of provocation, anonymous letters, forgery, burglary, sexual exploitation, impersonation, defamation, blackmail, and extortion. For the first time in the FBI's history, an aggressive intelligence program listed individual targets by name. This uniquely personalized emphasis eloquently bespoke a racism that perceived black leaders as corrupt, criminal, oversexed demagogues who had to be destroyed and replaced by respectable figures who alone could be trusted to lead the ignorant blacks. Now, the outcome of this program was this. The assault on the Black Panthers, by way of example, claimed 28 lives over an 18-month period. Some direct victims of aggressive intelligence actions, and others traceable to feuds fostered by the FBI. For example, in Los Angeles between the Black Panthers and the United Slaves. The Bureau unleashed what could only be described as a reign of terror that crushed the organization and neutralized its leadership through death, imprisonment, and exile. Its ferocity and cruelty can only be explained by a racism that holds the lives of black people cheaply. So when we return home to the United Kingdom, having listed that history in the United States, we shouldn't be surprised. Go back 40 years to Grunwick, which stands on a par in terms of its political and historical importance with the Miners trial, where Asian women challenged the stereotype of being silent and subservient. And now we have evidence emerging to show how the Special Demonstration Squad, the SDS, the controversial Metropolitan Police undercover unit, infiltrated that protest and sought, amongst other things, to provide evidence to show a link to left-wing groups such as the SWP, who were, apparently they thought, masterminding this, because people of color were, of course, not intelligent enough to organize these things for themselves. And again, there's no surprise then when we learn about the infiltration of the Stephen Lawrence movement, which was reaching a stage where it was putting the Metropolitan Police very much under the spotlight, when right-wing newspapers like the Daily Mail were coming out in support of the family. This posed a threat to the police, and this was being organized by black people. So again, why are we surprised? Because in conclusion, the clandestine character of intelligence operations, and of course, the difficulty in identifying the source of a claimed abuse, handicaps the pursuit of a judicial remedy, and the ambiguity of the injury suffered by the target, contrasted with the importance of the interest, no less, we're told, than the security of the nation state itself, asserted in defense of the challenged conduct, increases a complainant's burdens. Moreover, even when such obstacles are surmounted, the successful outcome of a particular lawsuit is powerless to reduce the intimidating impact of surveillance programs, because judicial remedies are typically limited to individuals, and in any event, often delayed until long after the conduct complained of. So the fact is that intelligence as a means of containing movements for change, as a system of control, is simply too powerful a weapon in a highly conservative political, economic, and social order to be lightly abandoned. Intelligence is an almost inevitable weapon of choice. Secrecy permits it to function without accountability or control by the constitutional standards that prohibit interference with political expression. Because as President Obama recently put it in relation to the Snowden papers and their disclosure, quote, "You can't have 100% security and then 100% privacy and zero inconvenience, i.e., we have to pay the price." Thank you.